Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Welcome all. We're really so happy to have you all here. Please grab your tea, grab your coffee. We're so happy to have you all here this morning for this awesome presentation. I hope we have so many people joining from across the world this morning. So I was hoping that as you all come in, if you could just take a minute and say hi and where you're joining us from in the chat so that everyone can see that. This morning, as you come in and are getting settled, I just wanted to let you know that we are recording this conversation and that we will be posting it on YouTube. So if you need to leave anytime, that's no problem. Maybe in a couple days to 2 months, I will post this on YouTube. I'm making fun of myself here, and so you can check it out. Oh, wonderful. Okay, from Brighton. Oh my gosh, so many people from all over. This is awesome. Jennifer, thanks for joining us this morning. David, so nice to see you all. All right. Laura, will you kick us off with a formal presentation this morning?
It's maybe it's just early, but I was like, what? I was reading the chat so intently, like, ooh, where's everyone coming from? But yeah, I'm so excited to welcome our kind of final talk of the Experimental Weaving Talk series for the fall. I'm really excited that we are able to host Lars Shimabukuro today. Oh boy, wow. Anyway, I just went totally blank, and so I'm just gonna like reset for a second. But I'm really excited to have you here, Lars. I'm really excited to share your work. I think what we've done with some of the other intros is speak a bit about what strikes us about the work. And for me, your work has a sense of lightness and space, and really most of all, color. And I feel like we've done so much work around like texture and structure that I'm really happy for color and space and body and room and orientation to come into play. I'm really excited for your talk, and thank you so much for joining us today. I will let you go ahead and load up your slides, and I'll just give maybe a preview to the audience about the structure. So Lars will give their talk, and then afterwards we'll have time for Q&A. And at the very end, we have a few announcements about the next residency cycle. So stay tuned. But Lars, welcome, and we're really excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Julie. I mean, sorry. Oh my gosh, I saw Julie enter the chat. Thank you, Laura.
I know, right? It's hard.
1 second.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Okay, I'm gonna share the presentation. Let me know if you can see that. Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Lars Shimabukuro. Thank you so much, Laura, for that introduction, and Stephen. So I am honored to be able to share my work with you all today. Before my talk, I do want to acknowledge all of the violence that we're witnessing right now in Gaza, the Congo, and Sudan. And in solidarity with all Indigenous peoples, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement, as well as a contemporary Lenape artist whose work connects with my practice. And 1 second. For some reason, it won't let me advance to the next slide. Okay, there, is that okay? So I am meeting with you on Lenape Hoking, or the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape peoples. Due to centuries of colonialism perpetuated by genocide, forced displacement, and systemic oppression, today the Lenape diaspora is dispersed throughout the US and Canada. The Lenape diaspora includes 5 federally recognized nations in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario. So with these maps, you can see on the left the ancestral lands that I'm currently on, and on the right, what some of that forced migration starting in 1724 looked like. The information on the previous slide was sourced from the Lenape Center. The director and co-founder of the Lenape Center, Joe Baker, is the artist of the piece on the right. He started making these pieces in the 1990s after studying the beaded bandolier bags of the Lenape people. So the historical piece on the left was made in the 1850s in Oklahoma, And I think a lot about the unknown artist that made that piece in the 1850s, who most likely never got to experience living on their own ancestral lands, but whose descendants would 140 years later, such as Baker, while studying this ancestor's work. This type of intergenerational healing is something I think a lot about in my own practice. So on the left is another beaded bandolier bag by Baker, and on the right is an example of the military bandolier bag that originally inspired this design. So I think the ability of these objects to connect a people with their history of resistance is so powerful, especially by transforming an object from one that held the shell casings used to kill your community into pieces that tell stories of your identity. I want to read this quote from Joe Baker. It's important to keep in mind that tradition is forward, that traditional design lives also in the future, that it is not static, it is ever changing and ever responsive to the conditions of the moment. The last thing I want to share about Joe Baker is the Seed Rematriation Garden in Hudson Valley. This is a project that started a decade ago and cultivates seeds to rematriate through Indigenous diasporas. I have worked with Kay Green, who runs the Hudson Valley Farm Hub. So finding this connection made Baker's work even more special to me. I want to shift now to the lands of the Kanaka Malay people, which is where I was born and raised. I am a fourth generation American, mixed East Asian and white, queer and trans artist from Hawaii. This photo is taken from the summit of Haleakala, roughly an hour drive from where I grew up on the island of Maui. I spent as much time here as I could growing up, and I think my fascination with color and plants started in the Haleakala crater. As a child with attachment trauma, my safest relationships were with the environment I grew up in. So in many ways, I feel raised by this place. The tragic history of Hawaii and the legal overthrow of the Kanaka Maoli monarchy made me question early on in life what it means to be from a place. I think a lot about homelands, memory, and how to create a shorthand for these things visually through color and pattern. This photo is from me inside of Haleakala Crater after a long hike in the rain. In high school, I started working with the Auahi Forest Restoration Project. So this photo is an aerial view of the project, and the areas that are being restored are those dark green patches in the middle. So surrounding those dark green, I'm sorry about those notifications. I don't know how to turn them off. Surrounding these dark green patch, thank you, patches are what's known as museum forests. And so that term refers to forests that are being killed off by invasive grasses that were introduced for cattle. And there are many instances here where there are only one or two trees of a species that exist, and they can't propagate seeds because of this dense grass below them. So Auahi is working to restore the lower levels of forests so that these last trees can survive. Only 3% of native Hawaiian forests still exist. And this is another detail of how dense and layered a healthy forest would look like on the left. Working here helped me visualize the destruction of Hawaiian culture as a whole. The language was banned in 1896 when the illegal overthrow occurred, and the language was technically considered extinct until the 1970s, when native speakers on the island of Ni'ihau were brought in as educators. Alongside this forest restoration work, I was interning at a local printmaking studio, Hui Press, with Paul Maloney. So they organized youth workshops with visiting artists such as Cannonball Press and Swoon from New York City. These experiences made me fall in love with print studios as a site of collaboration. While at Hui Press, I was able to work on The Depravities of War, a series by Sandow Burke of 15 4x8 foot woodblock prints inspired by a series of etchings by Collot in the 17th century. These works were published by Hui Press in 2007. So this print from Jacques Collot's series, The Great Miseries of War, and you can see from that print before how Burke is directly working off of this composition. So Collot's series was in response to the 30 Years' War, which was fought throughout Central Europe and is estimated to have had 5 to 8 million lives lost. His series of etchings is considered the first anti-war statement in European art. As a first-generation college student, I hadn't considered applying to out of state, but my time at Hui Press challenged me, and I ended up being offered a scholarship to study at Yale University. Yale didn't have fibers classes in their art department, but the residential colleges that students are assigned to live in have different studios in them. So where I was assigned had a weaving studio in the basement, and Barbara Hurley would assist students on the weekend if you were lucky enough to get into a class. So I think a lot about how I only had a 6% chance of being assigned to that dorm. And I'm not sure if I would have known to try weaving otherwise. And here you can see how weaving starts to make its way into my printmaking. So on the left, these are collagraphs with different woven elements where I'm using a cardboard box or weeds as a sort of makeshift loom. And on the right is a woodcut portrait on one of my first weavings. This image is a woven cyanotype. So I wove together two images, one of myself working in my studio, and the second image was of someone in a Japanese internment camp weaving a camouflage net for the US military. I want to share a bit about the camouflage net factories that were started in the Japanese concentration camps from 1942 to 46. These workers were coerced to sign papers that were distributed throughout the camps, but it wasn't explained that by signing these papers, they were volunteering for this harsh and toxic work. So the public relations agency of the camps argued that these labor programs were military secrets, which kept any knowledge of these projects from ever being public. And these workers were paid $8 to $12 a month, whereas workers outside of the camp would have been making about $125 a month for this type of labor. The camps produced roughly 6,000 nets a month, despite protest and strikes by the workers. Weaving and textiles started influencing my sculpture practice as well. So after my graduation from Yale, I moved to Tennessee to be a printmaking studio technician at UT Knoxville. While there, I was able to take classes, and it was through a visiting professor, Jessica Ann, that my work really started to change. So the pieces on the left and right are incorporating photographs of the landscape on silk fabric, which I then manipulated around wood and plaster. The middle piece is strips of meat netting tubes that I stuffed with hay and then wove as tutu twill, and that piece is roughly 4 by 8 feet. These are some more examples of these meat netting tubes, like what you would see over like a sausage or a ham, that I am stuffing with hay and then weaving, and these are both roughly 2 by 3 feet. So these sculptures were inspired by wattles, which you often see at construction sites or along roads to control erosion. I love how wattles break down and get incorporated into the landscape, and I saw these pieces as markers of that process. I started being interested in how to incorporate the audience into my installations and whether putting someone in a vulnerable position changes how they take in an experience. The tree trunks used in these sculptures are from the catalpa tree, which are naturally hollow. And I recently learned another aspect of the catalpa tree that relates to weaving. So my friend and fellow weaver, Margaret Duggar, was posting about this overshot weaving draft catalpa flowers. And that's that same tree. And I'm hoping to weave this pattern soon in honor of that past piece. I think this is also a great example of how weaving has always been in conversation with our environment. This piece in particular is the first work I did around identity. It's titled A Looking Game or White Passing. I stretched white felt over the pedestals to collect footprints of participants standing to read the text, hidden between panes of glass. Participants on the floor listened to me read the same text. I used to play a looking game. The game included everyone, but there was no way to keep score. You are a judge, you are judged. Each time you play, you pick a side. The quicker you are moving, the harder the game. I move quickly. This is the game. You see someone. These are the factors, and it is important that you come to a group consensus. What fraction of a moment do people decide to frame? What makes something extraneous, and where do those ends go? What details make up a memory? At what distance do they obtain color? More so than the text and audio components, I wanted to conflate the intimate experience of reading with the public act of getting on a pedestal. At this point in 2017, I was feeling constrained by working with materials as I found them. I wanted to develop a relationship with process, so I sought out a 2-year weaving program at Haywood Community College outside of Asheville. Learning to weave was the first time that making felt like a natural extension of my body. This piece is woven with 2 blocks of the pattern seed. I found that I love color and that I'm actually not that bad at math. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Every time I set up a pattern and I'm planning out my warp, I look for ways that that I can make the weaving pattern process feel more like drawing. So this is my first double weave blocks project. I like to use, I like to combine colors that seem like too much together, and then I use the warp to figure out how to balance them. So these two scarves have the same warp, but are threaded differently. And I think they're a really great example of how structure affects how we perceive color. So on the left, I was weaving with 2 twill blocks, and on the right is another double weave blocks. These are some more pieces from that same warp, exploring how double weave can be separated into 3 layers of cloth. One layer of these, I'm using hand manipulated lino lace. This piece is woven with 2 twill blocks. It was an experiment in combining felted merino wool with monofilament and fishing line. And this is a scarf that I made from that same warp. I was able to emphasize shrinkage in this piece by combining blocks of 1-3 and 3-1-12. So the Haywood Community College Professional Crafts Program has been going on for 46 years, and it's incredibly structured. I really respect how the program prepares artists to approach their practice and start their own businesses. Since 2008, Amy Putansu has been running the fiber program, taking over after Catherine Ellis. So over the next few slides, I want to share one of my favorite projects, which explore production methods. So this piece is woven with 3 blocks of monk's belt on a 12-shaft loom. The goal of this project was to have a warp threading that could provide you with many different products. So with the same 3 blocks of monk's belt, I was able to achieve all of these samples. On the left, I'm starting to move away from the treadling sequences that you might see paired with monk's belt in a book. And on the right, I'm adding a lot of supplemental warp ends. On the left is another example of where I'm working more intuitively with the treadling. And on the right, I'm adding in lino lace and rope as inlay. A couple years after that project, I was approached with a commission. I no longer had access to a 12-shaft loom that was wide enough, but I wanted the piece to have 2 blocks of monk's belt. And so here are some sketches from planning out that project and some cotton that I dyed with weld and indigo for the warp. These are some images that I was using as inspiration for the commission. So on the left is one of my favorite fish from Hawai'i, the avela, and on the right is a painting by Joan Moreau in 1925. The title translates to photo. This is the color of my dreams. And these are the finished pieces. So on the left is a baby blanket, and on the right is a scarf for the baby's mother. And these are both roughly 38 by 46 inches. This is the most difficult warp that I've ever beamed on. It was a combination of indigo and discharge ikat dyed warp chains. There were 29 separate warp chains that I beamed on from back to front. I now think that beaming on front to back might have been easier, but that's not the method that I am familiar with. If I am open to suggestions, if anyone knows how to do this in a way that would be easier. And then these are some of the bandanas that I wove from that warp. These are roughly 23 inches square. And this set of bandanas was designed similarly, combining indigo and weld ikat with discharge dyed ikat warp chains. So after finishing the Haywood Community College weaving program, I was accepted to the core fellowship program at the Penland School of Craft. So from February 2020 to this past February, I lived here. As a core fellow, I was able to take classes in their 16 studios in exchange for working for the school. So on the left, I'm working in the wood shop on a coopered sculpture, and on the right, I'm casting paper pulp. This side of the program is really glamorous. But on the weekends, the kitchen was my studio, which sometimes meant cooking for 200 people. Ethiopian was one of my favorite dinners to do, and I would always try to make faces in the injera, which you can kind of see at the bottom right. When our classes were canceled in 2020, this work requirement also ended, so my studio practice was allowed to deepen. For instance, in March of 2021, I had my first solo show at Praxis Fiber Workshop in Cleveland, Ohio. My show was titled Trade Winds because of how wind makes me homesick, but also because of the effect that trade winds have on the landscape of Hawaii. So this photo is illustrating what's known as rain shadowing caused by the trade winds in Hawaii. So the coastal winds are pushing air up and over the mountain. And as it's rising, it's chilling and falling as rain on one side, on the windward side. And then the air is now very dry when it's going down the leeward slopes. So that side is always in drought. Annual rainfall on one side of the island to the other can range from 8 to 400 inches. So this piece is titled Minsa and Huck Lace, and I'm going to read a poem that I wrote in the process of making the piece before I describe the project in full. The restriction, extraction, and disposal of color only adds power to the saturated hiccups that bring back our history in full. What was a ritual exchange of love, put out in honor of us, all othered, made foreign, marking the space where we meet, to give us time to recognize ourselves, to uncurl our spines, long bent with appeasing, to change the air, realizing that we are so much more than mere reaction, education, or defense, to let us rest in our bodies, feeling without preface. The striping of centipede legs, 4 or 5 and 3 stacks high, a staggered repeat through a feathering of color, absence, or a twist of hand. Minsa, Itsu no yo mare mo, 5, 4, yours forevermore. So this piece is titled Minsa and Huck Lace. It's inspired by a textile tradition in the Yaeyama Islands, the southernmost islands in Okinawa. The women there are said to weave a sash known as minsa for the man they wish to marry, and if he wears it in public, he accepts her proposal. This exchange is said to have been practiced for over 300 years by the commoners of Yaeyama, but historians have found it closer to 130 years old and a combination of other traditions, such as a sash given as a gift of protection to a loved one. The mythologizing of the minsa pattern was a ploy to attract minge or craft enthusiasts from surrounding cities. On the left is one example of how minsa is woven in Okinawa, and then on the right is a detail of how I'm interpreting that pattern. So the woven structure itself contains a puzzle. It's dyed with kasuri resist to repeat alternating patterns of 4 and 5 blocks. The words for 5, itsu, and 4, noyo, complete the rhyme maremo, which translates to yours forevermore. I took this history and filtered it through my identities. The kasuri was discharge dyed, meaning that instead of additive dye, color is removed from the work. The pattern blocks that are typically formed from resists are made up of huck lace blocks, a pattern that originates from Scandinavia. I reiterated this pattern again using hand-manipulated lino lace, which you can see in these detail photos. This repetitive pattern staggers, skips, and overlays on the fabric, just as I relate to the various aspects of my identity. This piece was woven on a 12-shaft loom, which allowed for the garment to be woven as a double weave tube, and for there to be 2 huck lace blocks in that ground cotton fabric. The front part of the garment is woven with monofilament and stainless steel wire. If minsa is traditionally given as a ritual of marriage, I wanted to expand that into a ritual of love and commitment to community. I have often been the only one of a certain identity in a room, and this sculpture is meant as an altar to folks of marginalized identities sharing space together. The back of the garments blend into the steps, protecting the space between them. The first documentation of this piece in May 2019 was featured on the cover of the Surface Design Journal that fall. So being invited to Praxis allowed me the opportunity to expand this body of work. So this installation, The Lost Object, Asia Caucasia Caught, is inspired by the psychoanalytic essay, A Dialogue on Racial Melancholia. It starts out with this quote from Danzy Senna's novel, Caucasia. I wondered if whiteness were contagious. If it were, then surely I had caught it. I imagine this condition affected the way I walked, talked, dressed, danced, and at its most advanced stage, the way I looked at the world and at other people. This haunting condition of racial melancholia is what the writers David L. Eng and Shin Hye Han explore. This feeling is also familiar to me as someone that is biracial and trans. I exist in between identities. Their new theory expands Freud's work on mourning and melancholia to conceptualize the loss and depression inherent in Asian American immigration and assimilation. They challenge the model minority position as one that denies us full subjectivities, one that demands Asian Americans forfeit political representation as well as cultural voice. Instead of pathologizing Asian culture as a scapegoat for mental health issues, they reveal the systemic and institutional structures that perpetuate them. The essay ends hopefully, seeing the experience of melancholia as a productive and necessary part of rebuilding. I wanted an installation that held the weight of this research, if not the specifics of it. So there's the theme of doubling that I often use, referencing mimicry or the self and other. A hand-woven slipcover is on a podium or altar form. The tufted panels enveloping the columns are imagined homelands, reflecting back the same colors and imagery, but the scale and texture are distorted. The stories no longer match, but the mirrors on the columns connect the two spaces. These are some process shots from that piece. So a few months after the show, I was diagnosed with early onset rheumatoid arthritis, and I've been experiencing some other mysterious health issues that may be linked to an autoimmune disorder. I mention this because my work addresses trauma and complex PTSD, which is shown to heighten one's risk for autoimmune disorders and chronic pain. The labor that goes into my work in many ways is unsustainable, and that's something that I'm always thinking about alongside this work. So this is an installation shot of the back of the space. This piece is titled Deep Water, and it was partially Kasuri dyed in an indigo vat, as well as dyed with pomegranate and myrobalan. And I was thinking about the movement of light underwater. And this piece was featured in Surface Design Journal's exhibition in print, from confrontation to catharsis. This is that piece just off the loom, which has a lot of movement that I kind of miss and how it's hung now. And on the right, you can see some of the yarn that I dyed for this project out of the indigo vat. So this piece is cast paper, and it's a mix of fibers, but primarily cast kozo, half of which was dyed with indigo. And with this piece, I'm playing with the idea of a net that's holding a lot of weight. So on the left, you can see the CNC cut foam mold that I cast this form in. If I had the opportunity to cut the mold again, I would definitely angle it so that you can release the piece more easily. And on the right is a detail of the hand-woven strap that hangs the piece, and you can see how the pattern is sort of mimicking the dots that are in the casting. So this piece is woven with linen and steel, and it's meant to mimic shibori and indigo. However, the blue color and pattern are from cyanotype exposed on the cloth. And the imagery references breeze blocks that are often used in architecture in Hawaii. This piece is titled Landing, and I was thinking about the contradiction of feeling the most centered in my body when I'm in the water or in wind, which are always in motion. And this subtle movement is one that I also find when I'm weaving. These are some process shots from that piece Landing. So on the left is the warp that I was using, which is a linen yarn from Denmark that has a stainless steel core. And on the right are the panel pieces after being exposed with cyanotype, but before having the Devore burnout process applied to them. So that process dissolves cellulose fibers, leaving the stainless steel exposed. This is a sample piece from that same warp. The text reads, "A bend of light filtered through glass, gracing the corners of a room, the clarity of waking to something so beautiful." This is a shot from Tiger Strike's asteroid in Greenville, South Carolina, where I had a show titled 5 for Yours Forevermore. This piece is called Cutting Corners, and the imagery refers to how weaving drafts are organized. This is my first time experimenting with pairing hand-manipulated lino lace with Theo Mormon, an inlay technique. And you can see how these two structures really don't fit that well together by how extreme the draw-in is at the center of the piece, but I really like the tension that this creates. These are some details of how that piece was made. On the right, you can see how the hand-manipulated lino lace is building up in relation to the inlay yarns. This is another piece up at that show titled Drawdown. And I love that the lace in the middle of the piece, on the left, you can see how it's sort of shrinking into these curved forms. And on the right is the cartoon that I was roughly following when I was weaving. So the paper piece on the left, titled Hypotaxis, is made by using a blowout stencil and then layering sheets together. It's a mix of cotton, denim, and abaca fibers. And the piece to the right of it is made with the same fibers, but it's cast as a block. I want to read a quote from Jane Allison's Meander Spiral Explode, which is the inspiration for the piece on the left, while showing you some photos of the papermaking process. Parataxis is linear and sequential. He got up and walked to the window and looked down and decided to go out, etc. Hypotaxis is more spatial, foregrounding some parts of the sentence and letting others recede, more interested in comparative relations among elements than in straight temporality. It was only after he'd woken up and lain in bed a while, wondering whether he'd look out the window, or instead ignore the world outside and step into the closet, that he finally decided to get up. In this sentence, you have to wait until the end for the next action. The rest is a mental suspension, considering possibilities, not just watching what happens next. German sentences are like this, withholding main verbs until the end, and The Emigrants as a narrative was like this too. Not about what happened next, but instead weaving a net whose design I wouldn't see until I'd finished. So that book is about narrative patterns and how they can exist in many different forms, and it's helped me reframe all the ways that a cohesive narrative can look. I think that my process is largely about obsession, and there is some shame in that, but I'm learning to trust that as part of the process too. So during my fellowship over 3 years, I had the opportunity to explore new materials, and I think a lot about how material bodies have their own language and boundaries, and I love that deepening my relationship to them has made me see my body as a material too. So I want to share some things that working with material has taught me, and these next photos will be organized by process, starting with paper. I've learned to trust being torn apart, that more time in water softening is always the answer. I've learned to accommodate for movement, that a living thing continues to breathe even when severed from its original body. I've learned that it's the delicate connections that lay the groundwork for transformation, and that it's okay to keep secrets. I've learned that intimacy and flexibility are strengths, and that even your longest running relationships will continue to surprise you. I've learned that our first moments when we are most vulnerable imprint deeply. I've realized the importance of caretaking, not just working carefully, but the discipline of showing up and tending to something every day. This is another installation of those pieces, Fish Trap and Hunting Blind. So last fall, I started combining ceramic sculpture with basketry, and I would like to see these pieces grow into and envelop a space. I really like how the weight of the ceramic threatens to break the baskets that are growing out of them, and I want to push that tension in the future. So I remember learning about this Hawaiian fish trap form in elementary school, and I had been drawing it a lot in my sketchbook, but I was surprised to see after finishing that last piece how well I remembered it. And I also am including this piece again from 2017 because I love when I sort of accidentally revisit past forms. This piece is titled A Vessel for Passing Through, and it's roughly 36 inches high. I learned this technique of building horizontally from Del Hero. This piece is titled In the Garden for Mili, Mitsu, and Katsu. So the picture in the middle is how it's installed. This piece is dedicated to my grandmother, grandfather, and great-grandmother, whose lives were connected by a specific incident of domestic violence. As a child, I was always jealous of the care they were able to have with their gardens and plants, which I felt like they were unable of sharing with me. The paper piece was cast over a letter written to my grandfather after his passing this last January, but I found that the movement on the back of the piece was more interesting. I think that this piece is a good example of how my work exists in a space of meditation or mourning, but using craft and material as a constraint. These are some more examples of cast paper pieces. So on the left, you can see how I was forming this piece into a wooden mold. The yellow halos around the steel inclusions were dyed with marigold. This is a larger piece, roughly 20 by 48 inches. You can see on the left how I'm using plasticine clay to form sort of a shallow mold to press the pulp into. I really love using plasticine because it never dries out, so I can constantly reuse it for new forms. And as the piece is drying, it's releasing from that mold. This is the front of that piece installed. It's titled pull/portal, or there is something in me that only the ocean knows. I want to share a bit about a process that I learned outside of a craft school setting in 2021 from an annual event called Kudzu Camp. It is run by Kudzu Collective and Fiber House Collective in Marshall, North Carolina. So kudzu was introduced to North America from Asia in 1876. And during the New Deal, the government paid farmers to spread kudzu for soil conservation. The derogatory language used when talking about kudzu is incredibly similar to how we sometimes hear immigrants being talked about in this country. And I've also read about how the spread of kudzu is a sign that a site has been abandoned. So I think it's an interesting example of how care and attention are needed in all of our relationships. Roots of the vine can get up to 70 pounds and can be used for many different foods and medicines. And if you tend to the plant in this way, it dramatically clears the area around it. So this is how I learned to process kudzu fiber. Similar to flax, kudzu has to undergo a retting process. And the easiest way to do this is to weight kudzu vines in 5-gallon buckets, cover them in water, and then let them sit and decompose for about 2 weeks. And on the right, you can see me starting to clean the vines. This is a photo of how I sometimes clean vines in the Tow River, and this method allows for the current of the river and small fish to help with the cleaning process. On the right, you can see the inner core of the vine in the back, and the shiny bast fibers are towards the front. The inner core fiber can be used for basketry or paper making, but the bast fibers are preferred for spinning or weaving. So here's some of the kudzu split and woven. This is how kudzu would be woven in Japan, where it's known as kudzufu. Splitting the fibers maintains their shine. And in Japan, the woven fiber is finished by beating it with a wooden comb, similar to how you would mangle linen to add shine and softness to the cloth. This process is one that I'm hoping to bring into my practice next year, as the ethical sourcing of materials and textiles is incredibly difficult. This past July and August, I was able to make this piece as a ceramics resident artist at Township 10 in Marshall, North Carolina. It's titled, "And When I See You, I'm Home," and it's dedicated to the forests of Maui and the hollers of Appalachia. I was working on this piece when the fires were occurring this summer on Maui, and I spent a lot of time writing about grief during this process, as it was a relationship that I thought couldn't still surprise me. This is that piece installed after I finished the middle arch and flags. The detail on the right shows the woven kudzu, and this piece was exhibited at the Cary Art Center in their last show, titled "A Temple We Built for Ourselves," curated by Jason Pack-Swinkowski. The legs of this piece, the basin holds water, and the actual base of the legs are lanterns. So there are candles that are lit inside that sort of heats the water. And then the stack, it's a stack of bases so that there's also water for the flowers along the sides. This is an upcoming project that I also started at Township 10 this past summer. I want these 4 ceramic pieces to be connected by 2 tubes. And the outer tube would be an open lash basket similar to the fish trap piece. And the inner tube will be a hand-woven double weave tube. And as I was sketching and thinking about it, this inner hand-woven tube that I have been planning has already been figured out, of course, by the artist Kei Sekamachi. I was able to see her piece Cross Warp, woven in the 80s at the Black Mountain Museum in Asheville last month. The show, Weaving at Black Mountain College, corresponds to this new book written by Julie J. Thompson and Michael Beggs. I met Julie in my class at John C. Campbell Folk School this past May, where she learned double weave blocks. I also want to mention, well, yes, if you're in Asheville before January 6th, I highly recommend seeing this show. It's really incredible, or you can get this book. And I also want to mention that Sekamachi and her family were forced to relocate to Tanforan incarceration camp in California when she was 15, just to circle back to what I was sharing earlier about those camouflage net factories. So this is another upcoming project, just in the stage of material collection. This tarp has been outside of my studio in Philadelphia this whole year, and I've really grown to look forward to seeing it every day across from my loom. It started to fray, and I knew that they were going to throw it away, so I hung this sign up saying, please give it to me, essentially. And so last week they threw it into our garden, and I have to figure out how to store it. But I would really love to find a way to connect this material with kudzu next year. I think that both materials for me have so much to do with wind and water. Listening to this tarp outside of my studio, it truly sounds like the ocean, and it's just like, it's very special to me. So this year is also the first that I've been teaching professionally. I see art and craft as a space for people to play, have bodily autonomy, safely explore risk, and grow in community. I take teaching very seriously because I think being open to learn a new skill is deeply vulnerable. I taught 5 workshops this year, and I will be continuing to teach next year. It has been so rewarding to see how much students can learn in a short 3 to 5 day workshop. And I'm learning a lot too through the process of developing these worksheets and samples for the classes. So this middle photo is a Theo Mormon sample that I wove with different varieties of lino lace. And I was thinking about how to describe what the inlay yarns are doing in Theo Mormon. And I started to think about the entire structure as a form of double weave, because you do have these 2 warps on top of each other. And so now when I teach Theo Mormon, I'm including teaching all of the double cloth capabilities that are inherent in double weave. And on the right is a student example of Theo Mormon using lino lace. So the last workshop that I taught earlier this month was funded by 2 local foundations in Philadelphia, and it allowed me to offer a free class with stipends for 6 queer BIPOC participants. This work feels imperative to me on many levels. I see weaving as a somatic practice that marginalized people deserve as a support, but cultivating this community is sustainable to my career in this field as well. So this is some of the work that they made in 4 days, and 4 of the 6 students were completely new to floor looms. The work that they made as beginners is amazing to me. I really gave them all the flexibility that they wanted. And I was a little worried because I let three complete beginners start out with double weave, but they all did incredibly well. The other 4 workshops that I taught before this one only had 1 non-white student. So this workshop was really special to me. And these are some more samples of student work from that class. On the left is a Theo Mormon inlay, and on the right is a double weave sample. I'm hoping that free workshops can become an ongoing part of my practice. So please reach out to me if you know of a space or funding that might be a good fit. Thank you all so much for listening. These are some classes that I'm offering next year, as well as places that you can find me. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.
That was amazing, Lars. Thank you so much. And it's like, I felt really locked to the screen and moved and inspired. And yes, I would like to go to all the workshops and also worksheets. Other thoughts that was bringing up for me were just, I grew up next to the ocean, and now we live kind of on the downslope side of the mountain winds, and they get to be 70, 80 miles per hour. And it's the closest I've ever felt to like being in the ocean again. And so I was really resonating with that kind of relationship and connection. I'll also have to send an email connecting you to Natalie, who is our resident blue tarp expert and has been doing all her experimenting in the class on different ways of manipulating blue tarp. So yeah, that was
amazing.
Have to connect you guys. Cool. Well, I'll turn it back over to you, Stephen, to sort of get us started on a Q&A.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Lars. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us today. I love your work so much, and I am so happy to have you here. I wanted to just start off by sharing a question or a comment also from Jennifer Ho, one of our colleagues here at CU Boulder. Jennifer says the question that I have is, what, Lars, did you find about placing viewers in vulnerable positions when interacting with their work? And if there's a difference with sculpture versus weaving, i.e., is there a practice that they incorporate with all of their work? And this is, I'm phrasing it from I'm reading it directly from the chat.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I also like that idea of putting someone in a vulnerable position. I've really had to like rethink what that means in terms of accessibility and like how to make something also like inviting and comfortable. Like I think that especially now that I have so many changes in my own body, like I wouldn't make that kind of work now, or like I wouldn't make anyone lay on the floor or like or step up on something precarious. Um, but I like that question because I think there is something inherent about textiles that is so sort of visceral to our body. And I think like I was making that work before I knew how to weave. And I think there is something about moving into textiles um, that I think might sort of answer that question or like fulfill that desire for me, even if it's not making someone get on the floor or something. um, yeah, I think that I gravitate towards installation in general as a way of like immersing a person in an environment or an experience. Yeah, I hope that answers it. But
I think so. I mean, I I have a question kind of, I mean, building off that question of vulnerability. I'm looking at my notes here, and I love the thing that you said about craft and material as a constraint, right? And working against that constraint. But you also said that your body is a material for your work. And I would wonder if you could just extrapolate a little bit more on that idea of craft and material as a constraint that you push against in your work.
yeah, well, I think I came to that from the privilege of being surrounded by so many studios at Penland and so many different makers. Um, I think that there's something so interesting to me about like the sort of rhythm and language of working where, for instance, like I think that weaving and clay are kind of opposite each other of like where the like setting up a loom could be like so like that setup could take a week of like you're just counting and sorting yarns. And then I feel like clay is sort of the opposite where you're like or I don't know, the like the timing of like, okay, now you just walk away and like let something dry for weeks, but you have to go in and like, you know, check on the baby sort of. Like I think that there's something and being able to tie that to like, okay, like if my body is also a material, like what is it telling me that it needs right now? Like what is the sort of cycle and like day to day ritual that will take the best care of me so that I can continue to do this for as long as possible. Um, I do think that there's also an intense privilege to have that self-awareness and realization because like before I started the core fellowship I was working for service industry jobs with very wild hours and schedules, and I think that when you are in that sort of intense uh, work environment there's no time for reflection, and it was really through like changing my day-to-day habits to being in the studio that I was able to sort of like have this new relationship.
Thank you so much. As we're chatting, if folks have other questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and we can bring them back. But I'm very happy to keep chatting with Lars. I have some more questions for you. Um, I I loved your use of the Mensa pattern in that work, and I didn't know about that history of communities developing it to attract craft enthusiasts. I thought that was really wild, and to see that happening, I think that's just a side comment of just being like, I love this. I building on what you were just speaking about. and giving yourself time for reflection. You made a beautiful comment that I think a lot of craft practitioners could reflect on. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you trust obsession in your work. You talked about that. I think that's something a lot of us, especially like you, oh my gosh, 29 war pens, like 29. That was, I mean, some of the people are, you started your students with double weave. I would never. I love you for that. That's amazing. You have so much trust in your students and so much trust in your ability as an educator. It's amazing. But back to that question, right? Like trusting obsession. I mean, how does that come into your practice? I think sometimes, we're all like discouraged maybe from trusting obsession.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I think so, like with that trade winds show, that was my first time tufting those like 6 gigantic panels. Um I think that there's something, I think I and with my students, like I think more than anything, I don't want to tell someone no. Like I think that there's so much to learn in failure. I think of everything as a sample. I really trust that art has taught me to like problem solve on the go. And it's just sort of like, um, I don't know, like I really admire dance and like more the video and like more time-based mediums. And so this idea of, and I used to be like, oh, I wish I were a performer in that way. And I've started to maybe reframe my daily studio practice as like, oh no, this is where the like collaboration or like the more spontaneous things come in, is just like you're interacting with the material and then the material tells you what its needs or wants and then you get to respond to that. And like that's where you can either be incredibly frustrated and disappointed, or you can like learn a new thing about both of you. And like I think there's something like, I
Man,
hope that answers it, but feel free to reframe also.
it does. It does. I know Laura has some announcements to say. I want to ask you one more question, if that's okay, Laura.
No.
Okay. Okay. Lars, I'm gonna ask.
No, Christy.
Sorry. I know Laura has so much they want to talk about. Yeah, Julie, that's the material as a dance partner. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very insightful. A big thing that strikes me about your work, Lars, is that you always, and this will be a little bit more of a technical question, for your thought process. I am so impressed and struck by the ways in which weaving takes on structural forms, the way it, moves in spaces. You have so many radical and unique ways of showing weaving in these different forms, right? I love the comment of, you saw the piece the way it was displayed, but you preferred it when it just came right off the loom. I so relate to that. Like, no, I like this way. Can I get that to happen? So one of my questions for you is like actually like internal process, like when you're working on that final display, like thinking through how you make the piece, like the beautiful strap with which you connected that paper piece, like that just final, and then it just lays like a dancer, like it does. It has that dancerly moment against the wall. So for you, I know it's this thing that a lot of us people who work in textiles struggle with. How do you process, or how do you think through the way in which you're going to display these weavings? You seem so free from a lot of the kind of typical ways in which we present those things. So if you had any insights you'd want to share with some of our practitioners today, that would be awesome.
Thank you. No, I love that question. I'm realizing that I think it's because I never see anything as like the final form of it. Like I think that there's like, I give myself a freedom of like recycling work, or like I really like I like installation and sculpture pieces that are modular in a way so that they can constantly be sort of like remade or like even with like those ceramic pieces, I'm like, I will probably take off those baskets and then like weave a new basket that does a different thing. And so I think with my textiles, I mean, unfortunately, I think everyone can relate to like having a deadline is the reason that you like decide on a thing. It's like, this is how it's going to be this time. But I sort of tell myself that that's never the final iteration. And I think that's also a way that I have a lot of guilt around like why do I get to use material at all? Like, I know the waste and like all the things that happen with material. And so there's something about like letting a piece have like a life cycle akin to mine, where I'm like, you get to also change and do whatever or get recycled, or I don't know, like there's something in me that like needs things to like not be permanent, in a way of like you're not just like going in storage forever, you know. Yeah.
Oh man, that's amazing. I love that approach. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. Okay, Laura, did you have any last questions for Lars? I know we have a couple of announcements we should make here before
Yeah,
time
I
this
mean, I
morning.
will, maybe I'll save my question for later, but I think you're hitting on some points that I've been really fascinated by, especially around the critical role of frustration, especially if we think about like environmental destruction and where frustration actually becomes something we no longer know how to deal with as a human and with increasing technological abilities. So anyway, I think pedagogy for being frustrated is an interesting framing as well. Yeah, and if you want to, maybe I dropped that and then I was like, okay, and moving on. But if you want to respond to that at all, I was curious maybe how you think about it as a more like ethical or moral imperative to let yourself be frustrated.
Oh, I like that. I don't think I haven't considered it in that way, but I think that there's just constantly like, if the studio is like a site of like meditation, or just like, you know, like being deeply with yourself and with material. Yeah, I think there is sort of like an eternal like reckoning or like existential question about like, yeah.
Thank you for that. And thank you again. Maybe just a final thank you from myself, and I'll see if I can actually turn the photo. Let's see if it works. Yay, this is like, well, that's the front of the class. There's more people in the back.
Oh, okay. Laura, we lost you for a second
Oh,
there.
you lost me.
I can hear you. There you are.
Am I back? Okay. Anyway, well, that was everyone ran to the front of the class and we're celebrating wildly. Sorry you missed it. Well, thank you again so much. I'm really excited to say, and I think this was such a lovely note to conclude our fall experimental weaving talk series. So thank you so much, Lars, and thank you to all of you who tuned in. I think it's just becoming a really beautiful archive on YouTube, and Stephen has been really lovely about populating the YouTube channel with the recordings of the talks and also just different links to resources that come up in the talk. So maybe we can also just give a quick round of applause to Stephen for all their hard work. Thank you. Thank you also to Etta, who's in the back of the class, who's been really helpful on the administration and email and coordinating and ideating side. Stephen, Etta, and I have been in the works talking about the next experimental weaving residency. And so we would like to use this moment to announce it. So we are announcing our, well, it's not annual, but somewhat regularly reoccurring experimental weaving residency. We've done a lot of discussing about how the residency has sort of progressed over the 4 years it's been in existence, and we really want to focus the next iteration on a really expanded definition of experimentation. I think we've been getting a sense, and likely from my own interest too, in the really technical structure work, which of course I love, but I think Lars's presentation today also opens up more space to consider place, material, history, body, and really we're looking to kind of focus on that in the next residency. So our next call, the deadline will be January 18th next year. We will do an online info session that we will record in early January, date TBD. And the residency itself will take place in spring 2025. So we're trying to give a much longer lead time so that folks who need to plan or just need more space to relocate, which, we need a lot more time to do that from, understanding if they have the residency to when it starts. So that's one announcement. Our final announcement is that after each residency, our goal is to make a catalog. Elizabeth Michael-John kicked off our series, and we've just now got the original proof for her residency catalog, which I've really enjoyed and is quite beautiful, yet still has an uncomfortable amount of typos because I'm not a very good copy editor. But this will be available as a PDF on our website, and we're looking into options where people could print it on demand if they would like a physical copy, which I'm, partial to physical things as well. But with that, that is all our announcements. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Lars, and to all the speakers in the series for sharing your practices so generously. And we look forward to seeing you all again, hopefully next year. We'll see. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so.
Oh, Laura, I have one more announcement, actually.
Yes, please.
I actually want to just draw people's attention. If you all are local here in Boulder, yeah, if you're all local here in Boulder, Laura and I and our colleague Jackie Wermont from Dartmouth College are all working in the B2 Center for Media Arts and Performances the next 2 weeks. And we are going to be looking for local weavers to help us as part of our residency. And we're doing a really interesting project, thinking about how do we comprehend the amount of energy that is used inside of our cloud computing world. And we're using weaving to kind of create that metaphor. So if you all are in the local area and want to come visit and check that out, we'll be having an open house next Friday from 5:30 to 7:30 at CU Boulder. So please, please, please come on up and send any of us a message. You have our emails because I've been emailing all of you several times throughout the fall. So shoot me an email. Come on up and we'd love to see you. That's next Friday, December 8th from 5:30 to 7:30. And you can come and see our performance/installation at Atlas B2 Center for Media Arts and Performance. Okay, now we can be done. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And for those of you in the class, feel free to stick around.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you again.
Yes, thank you all so much.